Hello, welcome back to the History Inquirer. This is part 2 of the History of Jamestown. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, I suggest that you go back and watch it and then return to this one. Now, let's continue with part 2. When John Smith became president of the colony in 1608, he established a new rule. He that does not work, neither shall he eat. It was under Smith's practical leadership that no one died of starvation. By October of the following year, and I quote, the fort at Jamestown was restored and reinforced. A church and some houses were built. 30 to 40 acres of the island were planted. A glassworks was constructed nearby. Timber was cut up into clapboards for shipment home. The two auxiliary settlements, west at the falls and east on Nansemond Island, were provided with garrisons and some supplies. End quote. And that's from Bernard Bailyn's The Barber's Shears. And things were starting to turn around. However, after Smith left, as winter set in, things took a turn for the worst. This is the period that will become known as the Starving Time. The colonists suffered attacks from the natives. Food was again scarce, and some even turned to cannibalism. They ate dogs, cats, rats, mice, shoe leather, starched from their collars, their ruffs, and they tried to make it into a slurry and eat it that way. They ate snakes, they ate roots, and even dead corpses. Yeah. They also drank human blood. And even worse than that, George Percy, one of the leaders of Jamestown, he tells us that, I quote, one of our colonists murdered his wife, ripped the child out of her womb, and threw it into the river. And after, chopped the mother in pieces and salted her for his food. I judge him to be executed. The person tells us that this man was executed for his crime of killing his wife and then eating her and ripping the child out of her belly. He was executed for his crime after having confessed on their torture, meaning he was hanged by his thumbs with weights at his feet, thumb screws. By 1610, as Percy goes on to say, only 60 of the 400 of the previous spring and summer were still alive, and they were so lean that they looked like skeletons. End quote. The colonists were rescued by the arrival of Sir Thomas Gates and the new governor, Baron de la Warr. The Virginia Company also provided incentives for people to move to Virginia, including the promise of land. They also started the first Virginia lottery. However, due to Baron de la Warr's harsh treatment of the natives, war broke out in what became known as the First Powhatan War, which lasted until 1614. As a result of this war, 400 colonists died. More settlers arrived, and new towns and villages were set up. However, lack of food and proper housing for the new arrivals was still an issue, in addition to the lack of women, children, and laborers in the colony. This was solved first by the head right system, whereby if someone agrees to bring someone over to Virginia and pay for their travel expenses, then they would get 50 acres of land. The colony also sent over vagrant orphan children between ages of 8 and 16 to serve as apprentices. The company also, in 1620 to 21, sent over unmarried women in their 20s and late teens to serve as wives and servants to the planters who could afford to pay for the passage over. The colony, despite the food and housing shortages, needed laborers due to tobacco being very labor intensive. And in 1619, the first Africans arrived from Africa on board a Dutch ship. And indentured servitude, labor for a set number of years, was used previously and after, and the newly arrived Africans would be treated as indentured servants due to their social status being unclear. Slavery had not been institutionalized yet. Now, in 1618, Chief Powhatan died. The previous year, his daughter Pocahontas also died, though not in Virginia, but in England, not long after having a final conversation with John Smith. She likely died of either tuberculosis or pneumonia, since she was sensitive to the polluted, corrupted air caused by the coal smoke. She left behind a young son by the name of Thomas Rolfe. Around the same time, in 1618, the House of Burgesses was convened for the first time. Powhatan's brother, Opechancanough, took charge of the Powhatan Empire, and he, being more aggressive and warlike than his brother, more ruthless, started planning a major attack on the English. According to Bernard Bailyn's The Barbarous Years, he did not intend to drive the English off the land to exterminate them in genocidal warfare. The English were useful if properly confined, kept within a careful balance of forces. The problem was how to confine them and thus reestablish the coherence of life that was being destroyed by English expansionism. His aim was to strike a single devastating blow, a violent coup that would drive the English into a limited eastern enclave from which they might conduct their trade. End quote. His attack would not be carried out until 1622. And Bernard Bailyn goes on to illustrate how Opechancanoug's plan would play out. His plan for the colonists was violent, bloodthirsty, and ruthless. And I quote, "The warriors would wander casually and unarmed with provisions to sell into English settlements where they were well known. And then, at a given time, they would grab any object they could find: spade, axe, gun, knife, rock, log, tongue, whatever they could find, and murder every person they could reach, whether man, woman, or child. And they would burn all the buildings and crops." End quote. What saved Jamestown in the end was that some of the Indians who had been Christianized, or fully or partially, to an extent, had warned them of the attack. The warning went on to save some of the other settlements nearby. However, those further away were not as lucky. Some of the Indians were sitting down to breakfast with the colonists when the attack happened. Imagine, here you are sitting for breakfast, you have guests over, they're Indians, okay, you're just eating and laughing and talking, carrying on. And all of a sudden, they pick up a knife or whatever, and they start killing your family. And then you too. Crazy. As you can imagine, and I'm quoting again from Barbarous Years, the colony was devastated. In a few hours, in the western and central areas of the colony, between 325 and 330 English men, women, and children were killed. Henrico, 60 miles up west of Jamestown, near Richmond, or what is now Richmond, was most vulnerable and was severely hit. 61 lay dead. The ironworks, in which 5,000 British pounds had been invested, was in ruins, and most of the workers killed. End quote. After this terrible massacre, the colonists vowed revenge. They had tried to treat the natives well for the most part and bring them to Christianity to educate them. But now the gloves were off. War with the natives had begun. The colonists organized themselves into a military force and proceeded to raid the food supplies of the natives and destroy their canoes so that food could not be imported. They also backed the enemies of the Powhatan Indians, the Powhatan's rivals, and in at least one instance, poisoned wine was used. Here you are, sitting around the table again. The English bring some of the Indians in for a toast. So hey, let's have peace. Here, have some wine. And of course, it has poison in it, and the Indians died. Yeah. They would stop at nothing to have the revenge upon their foes. Now, the war would go on for 4 years, ending in 1626. By that time, the Virginia Company had declared bankruptcy. Its charter was annulled, and King James I had taken direct ownership of the colony. In 1625, out of 8,000 people who had arrived in Virginia, only 1,218 were still alive. Nevertheless, the colony would continue to grow and expand in spite of the difficulties. New leaders would emerge among the plantation owners who managed to succeed whether they were a gentleman or not. It did not matter what social class they belonged to back in England, or whether they were noble or not. America was becoming a land of opportunity. The conflicts with the Powhatan Indians would continue until the death of Obochancanough in 1646. Starting in the 1650s, new immigrants would arrive in Virginia with names such as the Masons, the Lees, and the Washingtons. In 1661, slavery would be institutionalized in Virginia. As I said earlier, tobacco is a labor-intensive crop. Until this point, Africans were indentured servants and would or they could receive lands upon the completion of their indenture. Though over the course of time, the large plantation owners got control over their House of Burgesses. They began to extend the periods of indenture. And so did Africans actually get land? I mean, maybe some of them did. I'm not exactly sure, but it is interesting. Now, Virginia was taking shape. It was stabilizing. There was a new social order with landowners, merchants, and large plantation owners. It began to look like the Virginia of the 18th century. Years later, in 1676, a disgruntled landowner, Nathaniel Bacon, started a revolt against Governor William Berkeley, who he saw as corrupt, favoring the planters of the coast. He wanted the natives relocated to the west or killed. His rebellion failed, but he did succeed in burning the capital of Jamestown. Now, Jamestown was rebuilt, but it burned down again in 1698, so the capital was moved to what is now Williamsburg. In 1699, when Williamsburg was founded. So, to answer our question from earlier, what enabled the colony of Jamestown to survive where others failed? First, John Smith and Pocahontas. Those two were instrumental in keeping the colony afloat with food, provisions, and those kind of things. And secondly, Baron Delaware, Mr. Thomas West, that was his name, Delaware and John Wolfe. Baron Delaware for his leadership and his unwillingness to abandon Jamestown. It's what propelled the colonists to stick to it and not give up. And he and Thomas Dale instituted discipline that was very much needed. And also and John Rolfe for the development of the tobacco industry. And third was the immigration of new settlers and the fact that the Virginia Company had a vested interest in wanting this settlement of Jamestown to succeed. They wanted to make a profit. So like I said, they had a vested interest. They had skin in the game. They wanted it to succeed so they could make a profit and whatnot. So that's what enabled the colony of Jamestown to really succeed and take off. Also, the Virginians established trade with the other English colonies, such as Maryland, New York, and New England. And it is New England, which was also explored by Captain John Smith, that I will discuss in my next video. Yes, New England. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Pilgrims, the Mayflower, all of it will be discussed in my next video or two. So please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.